Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for having me here. As Mino said, I'm Gabriele. I'm a journalist. I'm based in Rome, and I freelance. I mainly freelance for different media in Europe and sometimes in the States. Like the main countries I work in are like Italy, of course, but also France and some other countries. And next to that, basically, like what I do in my work is like two different things. On the one hand, I freelance, and I'm mainly doing investigative journalism or like long forms, so like longer stories rather than breaking news or stuff like that. And next to that, I also train journalists all across Italy, and I'm doing it on behalf of Google, which has like a sort of a part of the company which is called the GNI, the Google News Initiative, that is a part of the company that is basically devoted to promote high quality journalism all across the world. But apart from that, one of the formats that I use the most is the podcast. The podcast is like a huge thing in Italy. It got bigger and bigger starting from, I would say, like starting from the pandemic. So like at the very beginning of 2020. And nowadays in Italy, the market is much wider than it used to be a couple of years ago. Like I will give you an example. Like when I podcast, like a couple of years ago, until I would say like a year and a half ago, I had to explain to my interviewees what the podcast is. So when I used to get in touch with the people asking for interviews, I had to say, yes, I'm doing a podcast, and everybody was like, okay, what is a podcast? I say, yeah, okay, it's just like an audio documentary. This is what I used to say, okay? But now this word is getting more and more popular, I would say. And the market in general is getting wider. I don't know what's the situation here in Croatia with the podcast, but in general, the European market is getting huge. And the reasons why this is happening basically is that the podcast like doesn't require your full attention. So you can pay attention to what you're listening to, but of course you can do something else. If you look at the data, there's a lot of market studies on the audio industry in general. There's plenty of data that prove that people listen, that like the high level listeners, so like very loyal listeners, usually listen to podcasts while they cook, while they run, or while they commute somewhere. So maybe they're going, I don't know, they coming back home, they're going to the office or stuff like that, and while they drive or while they having a shower. So, and this basically proves that people can actually learn or can be interacted, or they can, in general, they can have fun, they can learn while listening and while doing other things. And this is like kind of crucial aspect in our society, okay? In terms of culture, so if we wanna talk about like cultural podcasts, this is like basically what I've just said, you can apply it to every single field you have, okay, including the cultural one. So let's say that of course, sorry, I missed the premise, like an important premise. So if you have any kind of question, just please raise your hand and approach that microphone and just ask, okay? Something I would like you to say is like, what is a podcast to you? So like, what kind of main characteristics, like main pillars, does a podcast need to have in order to be called like that? Yep. Can you please go to the microphone? Or maybe can we take the microphone to... Okay. Can you please introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Elena.
Okay, thank you.
When I listen to podcasts or look for podcasts, I usually look for some kind of unique perspective. And what I recently understood with the rise of like many podcasts is that I can only listen to podcasts that are of high audio quality,
Okay.
and that I'm increasingly more annoyed when the sound engineer job is not there, and I can't even listen, even if it's like a unique podcast. If the sound is bad, it's off for me.
That's okay. This is like a huge thing, but thank you. What she said is basically this one. So she's like, as a listener, have you ever worked on a podcast? Okay. As a listener, she's really much interested in the last step I mentioned here. So the sound design part. The sound design is the post-production part, okay? It's more like a creative task rather than like a very practical thing. So like, for example, she mentioned the sound engineers, but sound engineers only rarely work on podcasts. We more commonly work with like, they're called sound designers. So like, it's a more creative way of thinking about this job. It's basically post-production, okay? But this is very important because like one of the main characteristics of the podcast is that they're not being broadcasted live, okay? And when you work on a podcast, you can only call it a podcast if you don't think about it as a live program. Okay, so at any time, whenever you work, you always have to keep in mind that this is not for live broadcasting. Okay, so when you have like a TV show, a radio show, or anything like that that was broadcasted live and then recorded and then uploaded somewhere and called podcast, that's not a podcast. Okay, yeah, exactly. So this is important, and since it's not made for being listened to live, this means that you can work actively and deeply on the post-production part, of course. Okay, so you can include, for example, sound effects, music. Like actually like whatever you want, okay, even like jingles or stuff like that. So, and this is a very important part. Basically, the wider, the bigger the market gets, so basically the more listeners we have, and of course the higher the quality we have to provide is, so like we need to provide a higher quality, and this because exactly what she said right now. Okay, so listeners are getting more and more used to podcasts and they're asking for an higher quality. Okay, and this is very important. Another characteristics, like in your opinion? Excuse me again? I couldn't listen to you, sorry. Any idea? Who frequently listens to podcasts here in this class? Okay, that's cool. Okay, look. If we need only three keywords to understand what a podcast is, these are the three keywords. So basically, the podcast is an audio project that is, of course, is meant to be listened to. Okay, so if you have something video, okay, and you upload only the audio part, that's not a podcast again. Okay, it's something that is meant to be only listened to. Okay, you can only listen to a podcast. You can't see a podcast. You can't imagine a podcast, you can't view anything, okay? You can only listen to a podcast, okay? So, and the sound, of course, is the main part of the storytelling. So everything is based on actually is meant to recreate exactly the same relationship that we used to have as a children when some adult used to tell us like novels or stories, okay? It's exactly the same pattern, exactly the same. According to the way our brain works, when we have a human voice telling us a story, we get in touch more deeply with this person if we don't see the person, okay? It's exactly the same reason why, like for example, Freud used to listen to his patients on the back, you know, or while sitting on a sofa. So he needed some comfortable space, like a safe place for the patient, okay? And the patient had to be like relaxed, okay? And it's exactly the same thing we want to do with our listeners. So if they don't look at us, they trust us, okay? It's kind of like it's a trick, okay? But it works. And this is the reason why, if you look at the data, the trust levels in the podcast industry are much higher rather than any other industry in the cultural sector, so including journalism or university, science in general, okay? And this is like, it's a true thing. I mean, if there's data about it, okay? So the sound, the writing. So podcasts are mainly written, okay? Since they're not they're not meant to be broadcasted live, okay? We can write the podcast. So like we can write our episodes, we can write our, it's basically screenwriting, okay? But for audio, it's audio writing. And apart from that, a podcast is mainly serial, so it doesn't end with the first episode, but it's a longer story that is split into different episodes, just like a TV series, okay? So if we think about Netflix, okay, the podcast is not a movie, it's only the TV series, okay? It's serial, okay? Is that clear? Okay, do you have any questions so far? Okay, so apart from that, basically what can I do with the podcast? So what kind of stories can I tell using a podcast? So, well, basically any story, okay? So we have no law I mean, it's not forbidden to tell any kind of story, of course, but there are some stories that really work best in audio, while some others don't. What kind of stories do you think are like more suitable to this kind of format, and why? Any volunteer? Your name is? Yours, yeah. Martina, okay. What do you think? Yeah, can you go there, please? In your opinion, what kind of stories are more suitable for the podcast?
Depends about the interest of the people.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I was looking one podcast of Croatian influencer. She was talking about topics similar to my interests. I don't know about the healthy food, things like that. I was looking at that.
Okay, but so it was about like food, you said, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and how did it work? So, I mean, what was the main part of the story?
She posted the questions in Instagram, what we would like to hear.
Okay.
And later she and two of her friends talked about, I don't know, some healthy food, how does that affect people and things like that.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
also in Croatia we have a couple of podcasts about the famous sportists in Croatia. So I don't know, they invite football players, things like that, and ask questions about their personal life, things like that. So if you are interested in that, you can see some part of their life.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Any other idea? Okay. Yeah. Hello.
Hello, Basia from Poland. In Poland, we have a very popular series about crime stories.
Okay.
Also political.
Wait,
issues.
through crime stories or
Yes,
just
true
crime? Okay,
stories,
through crime. Okay.
Stories, history stories about crime. So maybe it's a little weird, but
Okay, but
Polish people knows it. Okay.
and how do they tell the story? So I mean, what's the format basically? So there's
Okay,
there's an host or what?
The lecturer tell you story about what happened in the past, why people do something, etc. The lecturer is very character. He has very characteristic voice,
Okay.
and I think it's also important in this case.
Okay, that's cool. And is there any kind of, like, for example, interview or maybe archive material in the podcast?
Materials.
Archive.
I'm
Okay.
a historian and museologist, so I think it's in Poland we really like this documentary stuff, documents from archives and.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So yeah, they mentioned like 3 of some of the most popular kind of stories we have in podcasts. So Through Crimes, which is by far the most popular genre we have in, I think, in the world. In the US for sure, in Italy for sure. Yeah, are you from Poland? No, you guys, like, no, these 2 guys, like, nodding, okay? Okay. Yeah, of course, yeah, feel free.
Hi, Mateusz
Hi.
from Poland. We were just talking about the true crimes.
Okay.
It's, as Basia said, it's the most popular type of podcast in Poland.
Yeah.
But I also read the thing you just said, that the true crimes are basically the most popular genre of podcast.
Totally.
Totally. Basically in US, I don't know, like 70% of podcasts are based on.
Honestly, I don't know the
true crime.
percentage.
I
Well,
read
it's a
somewhere
lot.
like
Yeah, it's a lot, yeah.
it's an ocean of true crimes.
Yeah, that's true. And the reason, yeah, of course, yeah.
We have also a popular podcast called Two Guys, and they are talking about what happened in Poland, and it's small talking, but it's also popular.
It's like
You know it?
it's like a news thing or true crime thing. Sorry.
Yes,
It's like news.
No, it's just a small talk. The guys are just talking about
like bar talks.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
They choose a topic and they just sit down and talk.
Yeah.
I
okay.
read a book.
Like
what
in Italy,
book?
for example, we have
This
like a
one.
very nice thing, so which is like a bar conversation. So there are these 2 guys that are. It was born, like, the podcast was born in a radio studio during like a coffee break. So that they were having coffees, okay, and they just start talking, like friends during a coffee break. And they say, oh, but let's record this one. And they record, like, and it became a format, It's not very popular, actually, but it's super fun. And there are these 2 guys just talking about, I don't know, like, super common things. There's no point. It's totally pointless, okay? This podcast is totally pointless. They say, okay, so what did you have yesterday for dinner? And this kind of conversation, So, yeah. But it's super fun because these 2 guys are very, like, close to each other. They're very close friends, and it's fun. It's just fun to listen to. But apart from that, true crimes is a huge thing in the podcast industry, and the reason why it's like this is here. So basically, No, I didn't mention I did it on purpose. And the reason is that true crime stories just trigger our mind. So when we can't see, when we are basically blind, we are forced to imagine much more of what we're listening to. Okay, it's exactly the same relationship we have between the book and the movie that is taken from the book. Okay, so when we read, we have, of course, details. The writer can include details in the story, but still I need to imagine something, okay? I mean, the book basically encourages my brain to imagine, to come up with fictionary details, okay? And the podcast does exactly the same. If I can imagine, if I can even feel deep into the story, like involved, immersed into the story, basically I feel like triggered by the story. So when we talk about true crimes, of course, this is much more impactful, you know. So like I feel kind of anxious, I feel afraid, I feel sometimes in danger. So like, for example, if I listen to a true crime, like a super well done true crime podcast while I walk in the city at night, so I might feel afraid or stuff like that, and this means that basically the podcast is well done. Okay, you know what I mean? So is that clear? Okay, so one of the reasons why, when I have to choose a story, I have to choose for a podcast, I have to choose a story that has a huge part of images, I would say, and can be like a suggestive story, you know, like something that can suggest new feelings, new ideas. So let's talk about culture. Imagine, for example, visiting I don't know, like a museum, okay, like a maybe museum with paintings or maybe statues or stuff like that, okay, like an historical museum. If I have like the normal audio guide, okay, I usually get like a physical description of what I'm seeing. So there's an audio guide stating that here we have a green wall with a microphone in there, another microphone in there with some yellow chairs, but the point is that I'm in the room. Physically, I'm in the room because I'm a client of the museum, okay? So I bought a ticket and I can see the room, okay? So that there's no point for you to tell me that there's a green wall and the microphone and the yellow chairs, because I can see them. Actually, you can come up with a much more I would say like a suggestive kind of writing style, you know, that kind of help me understand what I'm seeing. So you have to provide like a further level of understanding of what I'm seeing. So you don't want me to see that there's some yellow chairs in here, but you want me to understand that these yellow chairs represent something like, I don't know, and the idea of the yellow chairs comes from the feeling that the interior designer has proved while he or she was doing something, I don't know what, okay? So like you really have to use the power of your voice, to let me imagine or let me understand, let me learn something more. You know what I mean? Okay, and this is basically good writing. Good audio writing, I mean, okay? So you can come up with a text, okay? And you can read the text into the microphone. But the text has always to be written with the idea, like keeping in mind that people won't be able to see, okay? And you have to describe all the elements to let them feel into the story, into the room, okay? You know what I mean? Okay, any question so far? A che ora finiamo? Adesso, Nino, a che ora finiamo? Alle 11? 10 minuti, ok. So basically, these are the production steps. I also had a podcast company, like we produce podcasts, and when we work, we always follow these steps. The first one is a very journalistic step, and is not necessary if you are not a journalist, but it's the reporting. The reporting means basically finding the original material. So looking at the documents, finding the interviews, recording the interviews, and so on. Okay, looking for data, stuff like that. The writing part is what I said. So when, at the end of my reporting, so when I'm done with the collection of all the information I need to tell the story, I come up with a text. So I write the text. Okay. When I'm done, so when the texts are ready, I usually go to the studio, or I can always record in my home, and I start recording. Okay. If you need any kind of tricks or maybe idea suggestions for a professional recording at home, just let me know, okay, and we can talk about it. So basically, the two main things is that you can record in your car, but the engine has to be shut down, of course, and you have to be in a very far place, though not next to the street, of course, but maybe in a parking slot or stuff like that. One of the best places is the supermarket parking slot at night. Okay, this is totally empty usually. And the other one is your wardrobe. So if you step into the wardrobe and close the door, that's a super good audio quality. It's weird, I know, but it's very nice. It works. After that, once you're done with the reporting, the writing, and the recording, you can send all the files to the sound designer. Or if you don't have enough budget, you can do the sound design on your own. There are some softwares that you can use. The best one in terms of, I would say, the best one, in terms of quality-price ratio is Audacity, this one. It's a free software. This one, it's free. It's not the best audio software, to be honest, but it does its job, and it's free. Another one, which is much more difficult than this, and it's not free, is this one. This one is the most advanced program you can use. It's just I don't know. For example, they use it for making movies, Hollywood works with Pro Tools, basically, okay? So it's a very high-level thing. Next to that, we can use, I can mention, of course, you can use Premiere, okay? Premiere, of course, it's meant for videos. This one is meant for videos, but it works for audio as well. So these are the production step, and the last thing is some storytelling. So I only have 5 minutes left, so I can't, in the course I made for Kreml, you will find a much more detailed conversation about the same topic. There's if I don't get wrong, there's a whole episode that is dedicated to the storytelling part in the podcast. But in general, the idea is that if you have to come up with, for example, 3, 4, 5, or 6 different episodes of the same story, okay, and maybe 5, 6 episodes for the first season, but you're already thinking of season 2 or season 3, you really need something that is called a storyboard. So if you guys work in the storytelling industry in general, you probably already know what a storyboard is, but it's basically a document It can be a whiteboard, a blackboard, an online file. It can be like a paper thing. It can be whatever you want. But it's basically a place where you make a list of everything you want to tell in the story, and then on the side you put these single pieces in a row, trying to come up with the right sequence for your story. Okay, so for example, the first question when you come up with a storyboard is, how do I start telling this story? Okay, for example, in the podcast industry, one of the most common thing is to present yourself and to let me understand why you are telling the story. Okay, the narrator in the podcast is a very important person, the so-called host. Okay, is very relevant. So there must be a reason why it's being you telling this story to me, okay, and not other people. So presenting yourself is a good idea to start with, but you can always start with an interview. You can always start with a fiction scenario, like for example something like, okay, imagine yourself in this situation, what would you do if blah 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 blah. Okay, so, and when you come up with a storyboard, it's very complicated. Of course, you can work hours and hours and days and days. Like for example, like right now in these days, I'm working on a storyboard, and it took me 1 week to come up with the final storyboard. Okay, but what I did is basically I chose the very first scene, then I chose the very last scene, so the very beginning and the very end of the story. Okay, so the beginning of the first episode and the end of the last episode. Then I come up with everything that is in between, so the end of the first episode, the beginning of the second one, okay, and so on. So the links between the different episodes, and then everything that is in between. And whenever I add something, I always realize, oh no, there's a mistake in this storyboard, okay, because there are some, that you can't just mix the elements in any order, okay, like randomly. You always have to keep like a rational input on your story, okay. So sometimes you realize that, for example, you have just stated that somebody has passed away, but you forgot to introduce this character and say, oh no, this guy is dying, but I never told anyone who this guy is in this story. So so I have to go back and change my storyboard. So it's a very challenging part. It's a very fun part. Like, in my opinion, is the funnest part of this job, coming up with the storyboard, because it's the step where you really have to shape your story. Okay, so the story is something that we already know. The way you shape it makes the difference, really makes the difference. Have you ever watched Memento, the movie? There's a super famous movie called Memento, this one. This movie? Or maybe in English it's called differently. No. Yeah, this one. This movie, if you watch this movie, you really understand what a storyboard is. So basically, there's a story in this movie, and the story is pretty. The movie exists in two different versions. I would say, like, the famous one, the famous version is made of like totally random scenes, okay, with no chronological order, and it's super difficult to follow, but it has a huge meaning. So because the main character is a guy that lost his memory, okay, and he has to tattoo his own body to understand all the progress he's making in an investigation, okay, because otherwise he forgets everything, okay. And of course, the movie, so this version is made with like random scenes that you don't understand what's the chronological order, because he doesn't remember. Okay, so you can feel like the main character. The point is that the same movie has been produced with a chronological order as well. So the storyboard has changed. Exactly the same scenes, but with a different storyboard, okay, different order. And I can tell you that the standard version, so the one with the chronological order, is just like, I don't know, it's like a middle level movie. It's something like, I don't know, if you want to grade it, it's like the 6. No more than 6, while the other one is being awarded with I think like a couple of super important you see, box office $40 million, and I think it was also awarded with some Oscars. But yeah, anyway, it's a super famous movie. I really recommend you to watch it to like really understand what a storyboard means. Okay, I'm done here. So as I said, this is just like a summary. This presentation is a summary of a much wider training course we have on Kreml on podcast, with a huge focus on the cultural industry, of course. If you want to get in touch with me for any kind of question, of course, you can always stop me here or in the upcoming days. But if you have any other questions in the future, just you can get in touch here.